Here's how I made destructible blockers for my Unreal Engine 5 game. Hey everyone, my name is Oleg and this is the fourth part for the devlog of my game Circulation. In this video I will talk about creating a destructible object, including mechanics, sound, visuals, and some of the thought process that went into it. But before we start, you can now wishlist Circulation on Steam. I finally managed to set up a Steam page, and for me as a game developer it's super important to start collecting wishlists as soon as possible. So if you could just follow the link in the description and add Circulation to your wishlist, that would be amazing. Thank you very much in advance. Now let's break down the destructible for my game. Pun intended. This is not the first version of destructible objects I made. As it usually is the case with destructible objects in games, the first thing that comes to mind is something like a clay pot. And that's also where I started. At that time I just wanted to try out Unreal's chaos destruction system and just play around with it. So I created this clay pot, and later on it turned into an urn with a lid and a face on top to kind of fit this creepy, eerie environment better. I implemented a couple of mechanics like collectibles, so when you break the pot there will be an energy sphere released and it follows you until the player absorbs it. The more I progressed with the development of the game, the less I could find a proper use for collectibles and this type of object in general, because collecting just for the sake of it doesn't make much sense, so I abandoned this concept. However, I reworked the collectibles because I think they are very important for this type of game, and I'm gonna talk about this in a future video. Also, a couple of problems I noticed with geometry collections in general. Just a quick explanation. A geometry collection is basically a cluster of fractured pieces that is holding together. So when you apply the chaos destruction system onto a mesh that you want to be able to break later on, Unreal will create a geometry collection from this. The regular use would be just a static object that would break on impact. You can adjust the geometry collection to crumble instantly or piece by piece, as well as the force that is needed to break it. But with the clay pots, I wanted to go a little bit further and try things like pushing them around, and that's where the problem started. Because as far as I know and from my testing, it seems like you cannot attach sound to the geometry collection. So if you have a blueprint with the geometry collection and the sound as components, they will still move independently from each other. The sound will always stay at the location where the object initially spawned. So I started to create workarounds by constantly checking the collision between the geometry collection and the platforms and updating the location of the sound to the location where the collision occurs. And if, let's say, the clay pot would fall down from the platform, there will be no sound played, or the last sound that occurred at the location of the collision would be played constantly. If you guys encounter the same problems, or if you know how to fix this, it would be interesting if you would let me know in the comments. However, the time and effort was not for nothing, because I still have a functioning destructible mechanic that I can use in a different way. Nonetheless, I needed a new concept, and a destructible way blocker seemed to be like an interesting alternative. In general, this new blocker should accomplish two things. The first thing, blocking the pathways on the platforms and inside the pipes. What the player does is basically move around, explore the environment, and find the right pathway to the exit. And this blocker object is the adversary or the enemy that prevents the player from doing that. The second thing that it does is blocking the machines from being used by the player. The machines have a trigger sphere that checks for overlapping blockers, and as long as at least one blocker is overlapping the trigger sphere, the machines will not work. Now, what do you do as a player? You break them. I think in general in games, it's a lot of fun to break things, to destroy them, and this mechanic seemed to me like a very good addition to this type of game. There's something blocking an entrance, break your way through. There's something preventing the machine from activating, break it to make it work. It's honestly really satisfying to see and hear all these little parts flying in the air and crumbling around you. Regarding the breaking sound, this is the only occasion where I use sound effects that I bought online. Although technically the sounds are good, I kind of want to record my own sounds for this, just for the fun of it. Okay, let's talk about the visuals and how and why I came up with this form. Here are a couple of questions I asked myself while thinking about the design of this object. Why and how can something block a pathway or machine? On one or two occasions it can be a technical defect, rust, or something that fell over and blocking a machine from working. But how to make it a more logical and consistent occurrence throughout the game? It has to be something that kind of grows around or into things. The first thing that came to mind was roots, but obviously you cannot break them. Then I tried experimenting with crystallized shapes, but it was too generic. My second idea was something like mold, fungus, or corals, which you can break. And then I made a couple of experiments in Blender with metaballs and spawned particles for randomization. I finally settled on a shape that I like. But there was another issue. Although barely noticeable in-game, the mesh had some geometry issues and the shading had some problems. Although I didn't notice any performance issues whatsoever because Unreal handles geometry really good. I still decided to make the mesh cleaner with less geometry, just as a personal challenge. I rebuilt the form from simple spheres and merged them together. However, cleaning up the geometry afterwards was quite tedious and time consuming. The UV unwrapping was a challenge in itself. Now, because this is such an irregular form, it took me quite some time to figure out how to unwrap it properly. It turned out the best or the most accurate way to unwrap it was to create a seam that goes from hole to hole throughout the whole object. In the end, there were just two islands, the inside and the outside. Now, where we have the shape, let's talk about the material for this object. I'm trying to reuse the existing materials as much as possible because it saves time and performance. So for the blocker, I'm using the same material as I use on the platforms. I just had to create a new instance material and change a couple of values. When applied to the geometry collection, it creates this fossilized, moldy, grungy look. It has this bluish black coloring on top and it looks like mold or moss is growing on top of it. So in general, I think the material fits the object very well because it makes the object look unique enough and stand out, but at the same time it blends well enough into the environment. And the last thing, what to do with the broken pieces. The best solution I found that fits my game and doesn't feel disruptive is to use Dither Fade with the opacity mask. After the destruction happens, I'm setting the scalar parameter value of the opacity mask from 1 to 0 with a timeline, and the pieces are slowly dissolving. So yeah, that's it guys, Circulation Devlog Part 4. I know I didn't talk about some details like particles, but I think this could be an interesting video for the next time. But anyway, I hope it was inspiring in some way and I hope you got something out of this. If you saw something interesting in my game and you want to know more about, please let me know in the comments. If you like this type of content, please let me know and feel free to follow the channel. And please wishlist Circulation on Steam, the link will be in the description. Let's keep working on our projects and our games because quality takes time. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.